Hello everyone, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, your quiet corner of the internet where the past unfolds slowly, gently, inviting you to drift into dreams. As the world outside quiets down and shadows lengthen, we often find ourselves drawn to stories, especially those that illuminate the hidden corners of history, stories that might otherwise be forgotten. Tonight we're taking a journey to Victorian London, a city often painted with broad strokes of romanticism and gaslight mystery. But beneath that veneer of progress and propriety, there was another far harsher reality, a brutal undertow for those caught in its relentless currents. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we pull back the lace curtain on a life you'd never wish to know. Victorian London, as you may have often imagined, it was a city of stark, almost theatrical contrasts. On one hand, you had the shimmering promise of the Great Exhibition, the marvels of industrialization, a burgeoning middle class and a rigid, almost suffocating sense of moral order. Carriages clip-clopped on cobblestone streets, delivering ladies in elaborate gowns to their elegant drawing rooms, where conversations revolved around the latest literary sensation or the proper etiquette for a tea party. The air would have hummed with the ambition of empire, the certainty of progress, and the stern, unyielding gaze of Queen Victoria herself presiding over a golden age. You'd think perhaps of Dickens's cheerful descriptions of London's heart, or the stately grandeur of Parliament, a city forging its future with grit and determination. Yet this carefully constructed image, this polished facade, obscured a truly brutal underbelly, particularly for those unlucky enough to be born without privilege, without family connections, or indeed without a dowry. This was an era defined not just by innovation, but by dizzying population growth, unimaginable squalor, and a social stratification so rigid it felt less like a ladder and more like a series of unscalable cliffs. If you found yourself at the bottom, the landscape was not just harsh, it was actively hostile, a constant battle for mere survival. You'd feel the grinding gears of industrialization, yes, but not as a symbol of progress, rather as the relentless churn that consumed human lives and spit them out. For countless women, this period wasn't a time of romantic encounters or quiet domesticity. Instead, it presented a near inescapable cycle of grinding poverty and systemic exploitation, a world utterly removed from the idealized lives depicted in popular novels of the day. You'd see the elegant ladies gliding past their skirts rustling with silk, and the contrast would be a sharp, almost physical pain, a constant reminder of a life you could never touch. Many driven by sheer desperation by hunger, gnawing at their bellies, or the cries of younger siblings were pushed to desperate measures that would haunt them for the rest of their short, brutal lives. It wasn't a choice, not truly. It was a surrender to the inevitable, a last resort in a world that offered precious few alternatives. Against this truly unforgiving backdrop, the life of a Victorian prostitute was not one of romantic allure or clandestine charm, as some later narratives might suggest. Oh no, it was a daily battle of profound hardship, relentless indignity and systemic dehumanization, a reality that history has often found convenient to either erase entirely, or perhaps worse, to sanitize and romanticize. You as a woman in this position were stripped of your agency, your name, and often your very humanity reduced to a transaction, a momentary escape for others. This journey we're beginning together delves into these grim realities, exploring the daily struggles, the mechanisms of power that controlled every breath you took, the foundational societal structures that trapped you, and the subtle social dynamics within the hidden, often terrifying world you inhabited. We'll start by entering that world right at the beginning of another grueling day. You wake not to the gentle chime of an alarm clock, but to the immediate sensory assault of a Victorian brothel morning. It's a feeling you've come to dread, a slow, grudging ascent from the depths of a restless sleep. The air itself feels heavy, A taste of coal dust and fog so thick you could almost scoop with a spoon, coating your tongue and throat. Your eyes gritty and unwilling to open fully adjust slowly to a grey half-light filtering through a cracked window. A window so encrusted with grime and soot that it barely serves its purpose. This isn't just discomfort. It's a visceral, immediate reminder of your diminished existence, a suffocating blanket that settles over you before your feet even touch the floor. You'd think the night would offer respite, but even that is often a cruel illusion. Beneath you, the straw mattress crackles with every small shift, a constant, irritating chorus to your waking. It's a shared mattress, of course, probably by more women than you care to count over the weeks, each leaving behind their faint imprint, their own brand of weariness. You're certain it's probably full of more fleas than actual straw, their tiny bites a constant companion, an incessant prickling that makes truly restful sleep an impossibility. Yet in the chill dampness of the room, there's a strange grim intimacy to it, the collective body heat of your companions radiating through the shared bed, a small sad comfort in the shared suffering. You can almost feel the presence of the others, their quiet breathing, their equally weary minds, beginning another day. The room itself is a testament to neglect and decay. This building, like so many others in your district, feels like it's constantly on the verge of giving up. The uneven and rotting floorboards groan and complain beneath your bare feet, each step a small gamble against splinters or worse. The walls stained yellow from decades of coal fires and tobacco seem to exhale the stale history of countless lives lived within them, a thick, greasy residue clinging to everything. And then there's always that suspicious dark patch in the corner that nobody talks about. A silent monument to past tragedies, forgotten occupants, or perhaps something even more unsettling. It's a constant low thrum of fear and foreboding, reminding you that your world is as fragile as the decaying plaster. Even here in this shared dilapidated space, the concept of privacy is nothing more than an illusion. You've learnt that the hard way. There have been nights, particularly when business was surprisingly good, that you'd be jolted awake by the brusque hand of the Madam Mrs. Harper bringing a customer directly into the shared bedroom. Your sleeping companions, perhaps still half-conscious, would simply turn their backs, a silent, understood agreement to maintain the pretense of ignorance. It's a stark denial of any true personal space, a constant state of vulnerability that never truly allows you to let your guard down even in the supposed safety of your slumber. Your body isn't even truly your own when you're sleeping. The air inside, though stale, is sometimes a slight reprieve from the outside, yet it's still saturated with the pervasive smell of damp straw mixed with hearth ash, a scent that seems to cling to your clothes, your hair, your very skin. But then when you brave the outside, you realise it's merely a localised version of the city's greater exhalation. London itself often smells of pea soupers, those toxic fogs thick as broth, so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. These were the fogs that choke the city, killing thousands annually, a suffocating, almost tangible presence that formed the very environment you breathed. You inhale and it feels like you're swallowing smoke and soot. The physical dangers of your living space extend beyond the unseen. Simple infrastructure becomes a weapon. You remember Jenny, a timid girl, breaking her ankle on the ominously creaking stairs that had no banister to hold on to. The indifference to her well-being was chilling. She was forced back to work immediately, a broken leg merely an inconvenience to the madam's profit margin. Your own body, already a canvas of constant aches and pains, feels more vulnerable with every creak and groan of the house. You wonder how long before the building finally collapses, taking everyone with it, or if it will be a more gradual personal erosion of your body that claims you first. And yet, despite the pervasive squalor, the constant threat, the complete lack of true comfort, this shared room with its meagre possessions, a chipped hairbrush, a treasured, slightly faded ribbon you keep tucked away, is the closest thing you have to home in this vast, indifferent city. It's a stark, almost absurd testament to your desperate circumstances, this decaying crowded box. As you slowly push yourself upright, the thought of what little sustenance awaits you this morning begins to form a continuation of this daily intimate struggle against the grinding indifference of Victorian London. As you finally manage to drag yourself from the flea-ridden mattress, your stomach already feels hollow, a familiar ache that has become a constant companion. Daily meals, you've learned, are not about enjoyment or even proper nutrition. They are defined by their monotony and scarcity, meticulously designed to provide the bare minimum for your body to function, thus maximising the madame's profit. You anticipate the same fare as yesterday, and the day before watery porridge and stale bread, often served in a communal bowl. It's filling but barely edible, a lukewarm, lumpy mass that settles in your gut, temporarily quieting the hunger pangs, but offering little satisfaction. You eat it quickly without thought because the alternative is far worse. True sustenance, anything that offers a genuine burst of flavour or freshness, is an extreme luxury, almost mythical in its rarity. You remember the burst of sweetness from a slightly wrinkled apple that one of the other girls, a kind-eyed woman named Eleanor, had managed to save for you. She'd slipped it into your hand with a whispered instruction to eat it slowly, savour it. That simple apple, probably rejected by a market vendor, felt like a profound delight, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure in a life devoid of it. You've even witnessed a girl, barely more than a child, save a single orange for 3 days, taking tiny, almost imperceptible nibbles, stretching the precious fruit as far as it could possibly go. This wasn't just deprivation. It was a desperate craving for small joys, a testament to how utterly barren your lives had become. The stark contrast between your meagre diet and the implied richness of your clients' meals is a cruel daily reminder of your place in this rigid social hierarchy. You'd serve them wine, perhaps catch the scent of roasted meats, or fine pastries lingering on their clothes. You'd listen to them speak sometimes about their elaborate dinners, their preference for certain cuts of game or exotic fruits. You remember one particularly absurd evening when a well-dressed client, after exploiting your body, feigned a sudden concern for your delicate constitution, suggesting you eat more greens. The irony, the sheer audacity of his unsolicited advice was not lost on you or the other girls. You simply offered a polite, empty smile, knowing that his concern was as superficial as the conversation itself. Survival for you extends far beyond the confines of the brothel walls. Mary, one of the older, more resourceful women, exemplifies the constant, physically demanding struggle for basic nourishment. You'd often see her disappear at dawn, making her way down to the docks, the air thick with the smell of brine and desperation. There she'd help unload fish, her hands raw and aching, in exchange for a few pennies and the occasional damaged catch. Fish that was too poor to sell, but good enough to eat. It's a testament to the relentless, back-breaking effort required just to put anything into your stomach. This isn't a choice, it's a necessity, a constant negotiation with hunger and exhaustion, pushing your body to its limits for the most basic human need. Back in the brothel, your personal care is as rudimentary as your meals and just as public. Daily hygiene is a communal affair often conducted around shared basins of tepid water that might have been used by multiple girls before you. You learn quickly the grim trick of skimming from the top, hoping to avoid stirring up the sediment that invariably collects at the bottom of the basin. It's a small daily indignity, a constant reminder that even the most basic acts of self-care are compromised, made unhygienic by your circumstances. Cleanliness is a luxury, not a given. Mrs. Harper the Madame mandates the use of carbolic soap, a harsh, astringent cleanser. It burned her skin, leaving it red and irritated, but it was deemed necessary, a crude attempt to prevent the spread of disease, a superficial cleanliness that rarely touched the deeper issues of health and infection that plagued the brothel. You endure the sting, the discomfort, because refusal is not an option. It's another daily sacrifice, another moment where your body is subjected to discomfort in the name of your commercial viability. You're not clean, but you're clean enough for Mrs. Harper's purposes, and that's all that matters in this world. The mirror above the basin waits a stark reflection of the profound toll this life is taking on you, a reflection you often struggle to recognize. The mirror above the shared basin holds a reflection you sometimes struggle to recognize. You look at the face staring back, noticing the subtle changes that have etched themselves into your features. It's pale, despite the rouge. You'll soon apply an unhealthy pallor that no amount of cosmetic can truly hide. Your eyes, too old for her years, betray a weariness that seeps deep into your bones, a silent testament to the endless nights and the emotional burdens you carry. And then there are the lips, set in a permanent half-smile that never reaches those eyes, a practiced, empty expression designed to appease clients, a mask you wear to shield your true self from the constant intrusion. It's a stark visual of the profound toll this life is taking, not just on your physical body, but on your very personhood, slowly eroding the woman you once were. Despite the squalor of your surroundings, the rudimentary hygiene, and the general unhealthiness that permeates your existence, you're expected to maintain a facade of superficial allure. For each shift, for each new customer, you must fix your hair and reapply your rouge. It's a constant, exhausting cycle of superficial maintenance, a performance you must deliver to meet client expectations regardless of how you truly feel. The shared rouge, often containing lead and mercury, is a known act of slow self-poisoning. You feel the heavy, slightly metallic paste on your lips, aware of the risk, but you accept it. Pale lips don't attract customers, you've learned, and attracting customers means survival, means a few more pennies, means another day. It's a brutal sacrifice, a daily dose of poison for commercial viability. And then the real work begins, a relentless physical demand that pushes your body to its absolute limits. The nights are often brutal, a blur of faces and demands. You might see 18 men in a single night, a number that feels impossible, monstrous, each encounter chipping away at your spirit. Or you could be subjected to back-to-backs, where there are no breaks between customers, one man leaving just as the next one arrives, a conveyor belt of exploitation that leaves you utterly drained. Your body constantly aches, a map of various pains and bruises. You carry bruises from the schoolmaster, a particularly cruel regular, and a new pain in your lower back that you've learned to ignore, accepting it as a constant companion alongside the weariness in your soul. To cope with the sheer dehumanizing nature of these encounters, you've developed coping mechanisms, a way for your mind to escape the confines of your body. You learn to mentally drift towards the ceiling, watching someone else go through the motions, detaching yourself from the physical acts, from the intrusion. Or you go somewhere else in your heads, retreating to memories of a forgotten childhood, a brief glimpse of innocence, anything to create an emotional void, a barrier between your true self and the mechanical, violating nature of the encounters. It's a psychological disconnection, a desperate act of self-preservation, but it also leaves you feeling hollowed out, further removed from your own identity. There is no agency, no power to refuse. Your obedience to Mrs. Harper the Madame must be unwavering, absolute. You remember Jenny, her face pale, her body trembling, forced to see 5 more men, even after she was so exhausted she could barely walk. And the girl with the broken ankle, the one from the ominously creaking stairs, she was working on her back the same day. Her pain completely disregarded her body, merely a tool for profit. These instances serve as chilling reminders of the ruthless demand for productivity, a complete indifference to your personal suffering, your physical well-being. You're simply a commodity, and a damaged commodity is still expected to yield its value until it breaks completely. But beyond the general indignities, there are the specialty customers, men who introduce an additional layer of physical and psychological abuse. Their demands often include discipline, spanking, or even tears on demand. their perversions becoming yet another burden you must bear. These encounters often leave you with painful, red welts across her thighs and buttocks, visible marks of their cruelty. Betsy, one of the older, more jaded girls, once gave you matter-of-fact advice, a grim piece of wisdom gleaned from years of endurance. Make sure he stays below the ribs. Her casual tone underscored the terrifying commonality of such violence, a daily threat you learn to anticipate and to a limited extent manage. Through the thin walls that separate your cramped room from the others, the sounds of the trade are a constant, intrusive soundtrack to your life. You hear the fake moans of your companions practice sounds of feigned pleasure. You hear the rhythmic, creaking bed frames, a ubiquitous sound that signifies another transaction. And sometimes you hear the occasional laugh or cry, different stories, different horrors unfolding in each cramped adjacent room, each sound a stark reminder of the shared reality, the collective suffering that binds you all in this hidden world. As the morning progresses, you prepare for the inevitably long day, your mind already bracing for the next wave of these grim realities, a daily cycle that began for many like you far too young. The path that led you to this life, to this room, to these daily indignities often began not with a choice, but with the shattering of childhood hopes, an abrupt and cruel abbreviation of innocence. Many girls like Mary arrived at the brothel with a naive, almost desperate hope, a belief that this was a temporary albeit distasteful solution to immediate hunger or family destitution. They arrived clutching onto illusions quickly disabused of them by the harsh realities. But for others like Sarah, the path was even more brutal, more direct. She was sold to the brothel by her own father when she was 13. Imagine that moment, the ultimate betrayal, her tender age offering no protection against the callousness of her own blood. This early exposure to such profound brutality, to the raw, unvarnished exploitation of her body and spirit, swiftly extinguished any lingering vestiges of childhood innocence. There was no gentle transition, no slow fading. It was a violent rupture, tearing away the protective veil that should shield a young girl. The chance of a normal upbringing, of schooling, of playful days, of dreaming of a future beyond survival, was curtailed, entirely replaced by the grim education of the streets and the brothel. You learn things quickly here, things no child should ever know, becoming fluent in the language of desperation and the currency of degradation. You watch the light dim in their eyes just as it has in yours. For many, the economic realities of Victorian Britain were a relentless, unforgiving force that offered few escape routes, especially for women. The burgeoning population meant fierce competition for the few available jobs deemed respectable for women. You might find work as a domestic servant, but those positions were often grueling, offering meagre wages, long hours, and constant vulnerability to exploitation by employers. The thought of 12-hour days scrubbing floors with only a few shillings a week and no real prospects would loom as a slightly less horrific alternative, but an alternative nonetheless to the life you now inhabit. You'd hear whispers of girls running away from abusive masters only to find themselves with nowhere else to turn. Factories offered another avenue, but these were dark, dangerous places rife with industrial accidents and disease, where the air was thick with cotton dust or the fumes of chemicals. The pay was equally abysmal, barely enough to keep a single soul alive, let alone support a family. You might have seen the factory girls on the streets, their faces smudged with soot, their shoulders stooped, a different kind of weariness in their eyes, but a weariness all the same. The life you lead now, though far more stigmatized, often offered a more immediate, albeit fleeting source of income, a desperate calculus that many were forced to make in the face of starvation. Then there was the sheer impact of urbanization. As thousands flocked from the countryside to London seeking work that rarely materialized, the city's slums swelled beyond capacity. Entire families lived crammed into single rooms. Sanitation was non-existent and disease was rampant. For a young woman, perhaps orphaned or with parents too ill or too poor to support her, the streets offered only one true path to immediate, albeit dangerous, survival: You'd witness girls shivering in doorways, their faces pinched with hunger, their clothes thin and inadequate against the biting London cold. The brothel, grim as it was, at least offered a roof, however leaky, and a modicum of warmth, however fleeting. It was a devil's bargain, but in the depths of winter it sometimes felt like the only bargain available. The absence of any meaningful social safety net meant that a single misfortune could send an entire family spiralling into destitution. The death of a father, the illness of a mother, a sudden economic downturn. Any of these could swiftly plunge a household into irreversible poverty. For the eldest daughter, particularly, the pressure to contribute to prevent her younger siblings from starving could become an unbearable weight. You might recall the story of Eliza, whose father had been crushed in a factory accident. Her mother, too weak to work, had watched as Eliza, barely 16, walked out one evening, her eyes filled with a desperate resolve to find a way to feed her family, a way that ultimately led her here. You also learned that the romantic ideal of marriage so prevalent in the literature of the time was often an unattainable fantasy for girls like you. Without a dowry, without social standing, without even the barest shred of reputation, your prospects for a respectable union were non-existent. You were already marked tainted by the very circumstances of your birth or the turn of cruel fate. The path to a conventional family life was simply not open to you, leaving you with even fewer avenues for survival or social advancement. Your future, it seemed, was predetermined, carved out by the harsh realities of your past and the rigid expectations of Victorian society. This lack of choice, this narrowing of all other possibilities, became the insidious force that led you to the shadowed doors of the brothel. The moment you step across the threshold of a place like Mrs. Harper's establishment, it's as if an invisible line is crossed, severing you from your previous life, however brief or impoverished that life might have been. The air inside, often thick with the cloying scent of cheap perfume mingling with stale tobacco and something indefinable, almost like desperation, seems to press in on you, a physical manifestation of your new reality. You might have arrived with a threadbare shawl clutched tightly around you, your few possessions in a small pathetic bundle, your heart a frantic bird in your chest. The initial welcome is less a greeting and more an immediate assessment. Mrs. Harper's eyes, sharp and calculating, raking over you, weighing your potential, your market value. There's a swift, almost clinical process of indoctrination. Your name, the one your mother might have whispered to you, the one that carried echoes of your past, is often the first thing to go. We'll call you Lily now, or Daisy, or Violette. Mrs. Harper might declare, her voice flat and unyielding. You become a flower, a pretty disposable thing plucked from your roots and given a new superficial identity. It's an immediate stripping away of personhood, a subtle but profound act of dehumanization. You're no longer yourself. You're a commodity, a role to be played, a fresh face for the clientele. You learn quickly that holding on to your old name, your old self, is a luxury you can no longer afford. The rules are laid out with chilling clarity, a contract unwritten but fiercely enforced. You're informed of the hours, the expectations, the absolute necessity of appearing agreeable and attractive, no matter the internal turmoil. Mrs. Harper's gaze carries the weight of unspoken threats, reminding you that your continued survival, however meagre, is entirely dependent on your compliance. This isn't just a place of work. It's a closed system, a micro-society with its own rigid laws, and she is the absolute sovereign. You feel the immediate crushing weight of debt even before you've earned a single coin. Board lodging, the new dress you're given, all are tallied, ensuring you're immediately inextricably bound to the house. It's an invisible chain forged not of iron, but of penury, far stronger and more insidious. The sense of being cut off, of being irrevocably severed from your past, is a heavy burden. You think of your family, your younger siblings, perhaps the reason you came here in the first place, and the shame washes over you cold and relentless. You know you can never truly go back, not to them, not to the life you left behind. The stigma of a life like this clings to you like the London fog, impossible to shake off. It's a silent exile, a self-imposed banishment from the respectable world. Any fleeting hope you might have harboured of a temporary stay, a quick escape, dissipates like smoke, replaced by the grim realization that this is likely your life now, a life lived in shadows and whispers. You're introduced to the other girls, a collection of weary faces, some defiant, some resigned, all bearing the same invisible scars. There's a brief, almost perfunctory tour of the back-of-house areas, the cramped kitchens, the washroom with its eternally cold water, the small airless room where you might mend your dresses. These are not comfortable spaces, but functional ones designed for efficiency, not ease. The pervasive smells here are different from the common rooms. The faint odour of lye soap, damp linen, and perhaps the lingering scent of last night's meagre cooking. You observe the quiet hierarchy, the knowing glances between the older girls, the way they move with a practised weariness, each movement economical, devoid of excess. The initial fear, sharp and biting, slowly begins to transform into a dull, persistent ache of shame and resignation. You realise that the very concept of choice was an illusion, a luxury for those with other options. For you, this was not a choice, but an inescapable eddy in the relentless current of Victorian poverty, a desperate measure that leaves you trapped, indebted, and utterly vulnerable. You're now a cog in a ruthless machine, your body and spirit the fuel that keeps it turning. As the initial shock wears off, a colder, more pragmatic understanding sets in, preparing you for the daily machinations of power that will dictate your every move from this moment forward, all under the watchful, unblinking eye of the Madame. Within the confines of Mrs. Harper's brothel, you quickly learn that the Madame is more than just an employer. She is the absolute sovereign, her word law, her gaze a constant, pervasive surveillance. She is judge, jury, and if you are particularly unlucky, executioner of your meagre hopes. Her office, a slightly more comfortable, though still dim and stuffy room off the main parlour, is a place you enter with trepidation. It smells faintly of her potent, cloying perfume, cheap brandy, and the sharp scent of ledgers. She sits behind a heavy oak desk, perpetually surrounded by ledgers and papers, a silent testament to the meticulously tracked debts that shackle every woman in her employ. This system of debt is the true master here, an insidious, inescapable mechanism of power designed to keep you trapped. You incur it from the moment you arrive, the cost of your board, the coarse linens, you sleep on the meagre, unappetizing food, even the thin, brightly coloured dresses you're expected to wear. Then there are the fines for a missed customer, for a perceived insolence, for a tear in your stocking, for any transgression real or imagined. These fines are arbitrary, enforced with an iron will, and always seem to grow faster than you can ever hope to earn. You're always in the red, always working to pay off a tab that only ever seems to expand. It's the Victorian equivalent of a perpetual credit card debt, only with far more dire consequences if you default. The economic reality of your situation is stark and brutal. You might see 18 men in a night, your body aching, your spirit worn thin, but how much of that truly ends up in your hand? A tiny fraction, a pittance, carefully dispersed by Mrs. Harper. She deducts for lodging, meals, medical expenses, often for doctors who offer more judgment than actual care, and those ubiquitous fines. By the time she's done, you're lucky to keep a few shillings, barely enough to buy a fresh apple, let alone save for any kind of future. You realise with a cold certainty that you are essentially working for free or labour, merely servicing a debt that is meticulously designed never to be fully repaid. The profit, all of it, flows directly into her pockets, leaving you with just enough to exist, to function, and to continue working. Within the ranks of the girls, there's a subtle unspoken hierarchy. The older, more jaded women, those who have learned the bitter lessons of survival, often hold a quiet, weary authority. They know the tricks, the unspoken rules, the ways to minimise harm. You might observe them offering small, fleeting acts of sisterhood, A shared piece of stale bread, a whispered warning about a particularly cruel customer, a moment of genuine empathetic silence. But this solidarity is fragile, constantly undermined by the madame's tactics, who subtly pits the girls against each other, offering small temporary favours for information or unquestioning obedience. Beneath this, there's also the constant threat of betrayal, the unspoken competition for the madame's fleeting favour, or for a slightly less unpleasant customer. You learn quickly whom to trust, and more importantly, whom not to trust. The new girl, perhaps still clinging to some shred of innocence, is often an easy target for manipulation or exploitation by the more hardened women. It's a sad, desperate pecking order forged in the crucible of shared suffering where even small advantages are fiercely guarded. You quickly recognise the patterns, the subtle shifts in alliances, the moments when a smile from one of your companions might hide a less benevolent intention. Mrs. Harper's surveillance is relentless, a constant low-level hum of anxiety. She seems to have eyes everywhere her presence felt, even when she's not physically in the room. Whispers carry and secrets are dangerous. You learn to guard your words, to keep your thoughts to yourself, to adopt a mask of compliant indifference. True trust is a rare and precious commodity, almost extinct in this environment. It's a life lived under constant scrutiny, where every action, every interaction is potentially observed and judged, used against you to deepen your debt or tighten your chains. This pervasive control, this absolute power wielded by the madame shapes every aspect of your daily existence, and it's a force that rarely lets up. Tomorrow you'll encounter the patrons, the very men who perpetuate this system, and the external world's constant unforgiving judgment. The men who frequent Mrs. Harper's establishment are a varied yet disturbingly uniform collection of Victorian society. You encounter a spectrum from the ostensibly respectable businessman seeking a discreet escape from domestic drudgery to the younger, more boisterous types often flushed with drink and a sense of youthful entitlement. There are the older gentlemen, their faces etched with a different kind of weariness than your own seeking fleeting companionship, or perhaps a specific forgotten pleasure. And then there are the truly predatory, those whose demands stray far beyond simple transactions, whose eyes hold a cold, unsettling glint. Each man, regardless of his background, arrives with his own set of expectations, his own quiet or boisterous need, all of which you are expected to fulfill without question. The irony is not lost on you. These are often the same men who uphold the rigid moral codes of Victorian society, who sermonise about female virtue and domesticity, yet here they are in the shadows, willingly participating in the very activities they condemn in public. You witness their hypocrisy first-hand every single night. They might speak of their wives, their daughters, their adherence to Christian values, all while treating you as nothing more than an object, a vessel for their desires. It's a jarring dissonance, a clear illustration of the era's profound moral contradictions, the stark chasm between public piety and private indulgence. You learn to read their faces, to discern the type of interaction they seek, anticipating their moods, all in an effort to make the encounter as swift and painless as possible for yourself. The interactions are transactional, of course, but often layered with a veneer of performance. You are expected to embody a certain role, the demure and innocent, the playful and flirtatious, or the submissive and silent. You quickly learn which performance yields the least trouble, which one gets them out of the room faster, which one allows you to retreat into that detachmental space. It's an exhausting charade, a constant emotional labour that adds to your physical fatigue. You perfect a smile that doesn't reach your eyes, a laugh that carries no genuine mirth, a series of polite phrases that mean nothing. Your body may be present, but your true self is locked away, carefully protected from the constant intrusion. Some clients, however, harbour a peculiar form of misplaced concern, or even a strange, almost paternalistic pity. These are the men who might offer you a piece of unsolicited advice, a small coin for a treat, or even ask about your life, though their interest feels more like morbid curiosity than genuine empathy. They might lament the circumstances that brought you here, as if your choices were entirely your own, as if they are not active participants in your plight. You'd nod politely, offer a vague non-committal answer, because you know their concern is fleeting, superficial, and will vanish with the morning light. Their pity does not change your reality. It only serves to make them feel marginally better about themselves. There are also the regular clients, the ones you come to recognise by their gait, the sound of their voice, or the particular scent of their pipe tobacco. These men, for better or worse, often develop a routine, a set of expectations that can be both predictable and sometimes slightly less threatening simply due to their familiarity. You might even discover a grudging unspoken understanding with some of them, a silent acknowledgement of the roles you both play in this grim theatre. Yet familiarity can also breed a false sense of security, sometimes leading to bolder, more invasive demands, as they feel more comfortable and entitled within the brothel's walls. You learn their habits, their preferences, not out of connection, but out of necessity. The threat of violence, both physical and psychological, is a constant low-level hum beneath every interaction. You learn to assess each client quickly, instinctively, gauging their potential for aggression, for cruelty. A quick glance at their eyes, the set of their jaw, the way they hold their hands. These are the subtle cues you become adept at reading. You remember Betsy's grim advice to make sure he stays below the ribs, a chilling testament to the frequency of physical abuse. You often brace yourself mentally, preparing for the worst, because even in the moments of apparent calm, the potential for sudden, unprovoked violence always looms. This is a world where your body is always on the line, always at risk, always a target. And yet this is only one side of the coin. Outside the brothel, society's judgment is equally unforgiving, a constant, pervasive force. Beyond the immediate transactional interactions within Mrs. Harper's establishment, you're acutely aware of the pervasive, unforgiving judgment of Victorian society, a societal condemnation that reaches far beyond the brothel walls. It's a judgment that deems you a moral outcast, a fallen woman, irrevocably tainted by your circumstances. This label, once acquired, is almost impossible to shake off clinging to you, like the London soot informing every interaction you have or don't have with the respectable world. You feel it in the averted gazes of passers-by, the hushed whispers, the open scorn, a constant reaffirmation of your relegated status. The rhetoric of the era preached from pulpits and printed in moralizing pamphlets painted women in your position as inherently depraved, morally corrupt, and a danger to society. You are seen as the antithesis of the idealized Victorian woman, pure domestic and pious. This stark dichotomy created an impossible trap. Driven to this life by economic necessity, you were then condemned for it, branded as a willing participant in your own downfall. The systemic failures that pushed you to this point were rarely acknowledged. Instead, the blame was laid squarely at your feet, making you an easy scapegoat for society's anxieties about morality and social order. This societal stigma had profoundly practical implications, further cementing your entrapment. Any hope of leaving the life of finding legitimate employment was almost entirely extinguished. Once you were known to be a woman of the streets, no respectable employer would hire you. A shop owner wouldn't risk their reputation, a factory owner wouldn't employ someone deemed immoral, and domestic service was out of the question. Your past, or rather your present, followed you like a shadow, effectively closing off all other avenues for survival. You recognise the cruelty of it, the very society that offers no alternatives, then condemns you for the one you are forced to take. For women who managed to conceive, the stigma was even more crushing. An illegitimate child was seen as a profound moral stain, not only on the mother, but on the child itself. You would see girls, their bellies beginning to swell, their faces etched with a deeper despair, knowing the near impossibility of raising a child in this environment, or of finding a home for it that wouldn't carry the burden of its mother's shame. Infanticide or the abandonment of newborns at foundling hospitals were tragically common, desperate measures taken in the face of insurmountable societal pressure and the complete lack of support. You learn that in this world, even the innocent are not spared the harsh consequences of judgment. The law, rather than offering protection, often mirrored and reinforced this societal condemnation. Vagrancy laws, public order offences, and later specific legislation like the Contagious Diseases Act disproportionately targeted women in your position, making you criminals for the very act of survival. You could be arrested for loitering, for soliciting, for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police, often corrupt and brutal, saw you as easy prey, further disempowering you and stripping away any sense of legal recourse. You learn to avoid them, to melt into the shadows, to recognise the futility of seeking justice in a system designed to punish, not protect you. This constant, pervasive judgment, this deep-seated dehumanisation forces you to retreat further into the hidden world of the brothel. It fosters a sense of isolation, a belief that you are truly alone against an indifferent or hostile world. While a fragile sense of camaraderie might exist amongst the girls, it is often overshadowed by the knowledge that outside these walls you are universally reviled. This external pressure subtly reshapes your internal world, forcing you to build thicker walls around your emotions, to numb yourself to the pain, and to internalise to some extent the very shame society heaps upon you. It's a profound psychological burden, one that weighs heavily on your spirit, making true escape not just physically difficult, but emotionally almost impossible. You understand that your path now is not only shaped by the madam, but by the very fabric of the society that pretends you don't exist. The constant pressure, the pervasive judgment, and the sheer physical and psychological toll of your existence inevitably create a profound, almost desperate need for escape. For many, that escape often manifests in the readily available, cheap and tragically effective balm of alcohol. Gin, frequently dubbed mother's ruin, becomes the preferred poison of choice. You see girls hunched over, nursing a small chipped glass, the raw, cheap spirit burning a temporary hole in their despair, momentarily blurring the sharp edges of their harsh reality. It offers a fleeting oblivion, a brief welcome respite from the relentless pressure of their lives, from the nagging shame and the endless parade of anonymous faces. But you also know with a cold certainty that it's a treacherous path quickly leading to dependency and further irreversible degradation. You observe the telltale signs amongst your companions, and perhaps even in yourself, the telltale glassy eyes, the slurred words, the staggering gait as they try to navigate the uneven floorboards. You understand perhaps too well that this temporary solution only compounds the problems. It makes you more vulnerable to unscrupulous clients, more susceptible to the madam's wrath and her arbitrary fines, and tragically more prone to the very diseases you desperately try to avoid. Yet you understand the allure, the desperate gnawing craving for just a few moments, where the constant ache in your body and soul is dulled, where the suffocating memories of a life lost and the grim prospect of a futureless future cease to press down quite so heavily. You think like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, but when every part of you already feels alight, any liquid promises a solution. It's a dangerous dance with self-destruction, a coping mechanism born of sheer unadulterated desperation, and you recognise the quiet pull towards that momentary release. Beyond alcohol, though often more expensive and thus less accessible to the average girl in Mrs. Harper's house, opium dens offer another more potent form of escape. Opium, commonly smoked or consumed in its liquid form as laudanum, promises a deeper, more profound sense of detachment. It offers a complete mental retreat from the physical body, a brief transcendence from the brutal realities of Victorian London. You might hear whispers of girls disappearing for a night or two, only to return with a vacant stare, their bodies even more frail, their eyes holding a distant, unfathomable peace, that quickly fades into a deeper, more consuming exhaustion. It's a more dangerous, more potent form of oblivion, a desperate leap into a world of dreams and illusions that extract a heavy, often irreversible toll on their already fragile health. The tragic irony is that these very coping mechanisms designed to alleviate suffering often create a vicious self-perpetuating cycle of entrapment. The more you rely on alcohol or opium to numb the pain, the more your health inevitably deteriorates. This deterioration in turn makes you less capable, more unreliable in Mrs. Harper's eyes, leading to more fines, more punitive measures, and a deeper plunge into an already crushing debt. This, of course, forces you to work even harder even when your body and mind are screaming for rest, pushing you further towards the very precipice you sought to escape. It's a cruel feedback loop, an insidious spiral downwards, making true escape not just economically difficult, but physically and mentally almost impossible. You become a prisoner not only of circumstance, but of your own desperate attempts to cope. Sometimes, though, escape takes a quieter, less destructive form. You might find a fleeting solace in the camaraderie of another girl, a shared glance, a whispered joke, a brief moment of genuine human connection that cuts through the pervasive loneliness. Or perhaps you retreat into the confines of your own mind, not through chemical means, but through pure mental willpower. You might conjure cherished childhood memories, vivid and warm, creating a temporary sanctuary in your thoughts. You might imagine a different life, a faraway place, spinning elaborate mental narratives that offer a brief, comforting illusion of control and dignity. These small internal rebellions, these quiet acts of mental preservation become essential for surviving the relentless onslaught of daily life. But even these internal escapes, however vital, are ultimately temporary. They do not change the cold, hard facts of your physical existence, nor do they diminish the ever-present threat of illness that hangs heavy in the air of every brothel and every London slum. The conditions you live in, the constant stress, the lack of proper nutrition, and the pervasive unhygienic environment mean that disease is not an occasional visitor. It is a permanent lurking resident ready to claim its next victim. This constant invisible enemy, coupled with the brutal realities of inadequate medical care, will prove to be another relentless battle in your already arduous life. The grim reality of your profession in Victorian London is that disease is not an abstract concept or a distant threat. It is a constant, intimate companion lurking in every shadowed corner of the brothel. The conditions you live in, the cramped, unsanitary rooms, the shared bedding, the general lack of proper hygiene, create a fertile breeding ground for a host of ailments. You breathe the stale, reeking air, you touch surfaces handled by countless others, and your body is in constant, intimate contact with strangers. It's a terrifying lottery you play every single day, with stakes immeasurably higher than a few shillings. Sexually transmitted infections, primarily syphilis and gonorrhea, are rampant scourges that spread silently and mercilessly through the brothels and beyond. You've heard the hushed whispers, seen the telltale sores, watched as girls slowly waste away their beauty, ravage their bodies, racked with pain and disfigurement. Syphilis in particular is a terrifying spectre, progressing from initial sores to rashes, then to devastating neurological and organ damage, often leading to madness and an agonizing death. There is no true cure, only rudimentary, often toxic treatments involving mercury, which often caused more harm than good, leaving patients with blackened gums, rotting teeth, and severe internal damage. You watch powerless as friends succumb, knowing that your own fate might be just as cruel. Beyond the venereal diseases, a host of other common Victorian ailments prey on your weakened constitution. The pervasive damp and cold of London, combined with inadequate clothing and nutrition, make respiratory illnesses like tuberculosis, the dreaded consumption, tragically common. You hear the hacking coughs echoing through the thin walls, the slow, agonizing decline of a girl whose lungs are being consumed from within. Bronchitis, pneumonia, and chronic coughs are almost universal, a constant reminder of the unhealthy air you breathe and the chill that perpetually seeps into your bones. Your own chest often feels tight, you're breathing shallow, a subtle fear gnawing at you that you might be next. Gastrointestinal issues are also a frequent companion. The monotonous, often contaminated food coupled with the lack of clean water and general poor sanitation means that dysentery, cholera, and persistent stomach ailments are a regular occurrence. You experience the cramping, the nausea, the debilitating weakness that leaves you barely able to stand, let alone work. Recovering from such an illness is a luxury you often can't afford. Mrs. Harper expects you back on your feet as quickly as possible, regardless of your lingering weakness. Rest is not a prescription here. Productivity is. The psychological toll of your life also manifests physically. Constant stress, anxiety, and profound despair contribute to a general weakening of your immune system, making you even more susceptible to illness. You suffer from chronic headaches, often accompanied by the specific kind of ache that feels like someone's using your skull as a laundry mangle, and an almost perpetual sense of exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to alleviate. Your body is under constant assault from the external environment, and the internal stresses leaving you vulnerable to every passing contagion. When illness strikes, the medical care available to you is often more of a performative gesture than genuine healing. You might be sent to a charity clinic where overworked indifferent doctors view you with disdain and moral judgment rather than compassion. They might prescribe a useless tonic, offer a dismissive glance, and send you back to the brothel, effectively washing their hands of you. For serious conditions, the workhouse infirmary or the local hospital wards await grim, crowded places where dignity is stripped away, and the chances of recovery are often slim. You're not a patient seeking care, you're a case, often treated with a mixture of suspicion and contempt, reinforcing the societal belief that your suffering is somehow deserved. This constant threat of illness, coupled with the inadequate care, adds another layer of profound vulnerability to an already precarious existence. The system of control and exploitation extends far beyond Mrs. Harper's immediate dominion. It is woven into the very fabric of Victorian society, underpinned by a complex interplay of class, gender, and economic inequality. You recognise that your predicament is not an isolated misfortune, but a symptom of a larger, deeply flawed social order. The rigid class structure of the era means that your birth determines almost everything about your life, your opportunities, your prospects, and ultimately your vulnerability to exploitation. You're born into a world where your value is predetermined, and for someone of your station that value is tragically low. The gender dynamics of the Victorian era are particularly insidious. Women are largely confined to domestic roles, their economic independence severely restricted. For respectable women, marriage is the primary, often only path to financial security. But for you stripped of reputation and prospects, that path is completely blocked. You exist in a paradox society demands your virtue, yet creates conditions that make it impossible for you to maintain it. The prevailing male-dominated power structures ensure that men hold almost all economic, political and social power, leaving women like you with virtually no recourse or means of self-determination. You're utterly dependent on a system that is fundamentally designed to oppress you. Economic inequality is the relentless engine driving countless women into your position. While London boasts immense wealth and glittering opulence, it also harbours unimaginable poverty. The gap between the rich and the poor is a chasm, not a mere divide. You walk past elegant shops filled with luxurious goods you could never afford, past grand houses where families live in comfort, while you return to your squalid room, your stomach empty. The lack of fair wages, the absence of any social safety net, and the fierce competition for scarce low-paying jobs mean that for the poorest women, destitution is a constant shadow, and prostitution, however grim often appears, as the only immediate way to stave off starvation. The legal system, rather than acting as a neutral arbiter, frequently serves to reinforce the existing power structures. Laws against vagrancy and disorderly conduct are disproportionately applied to women on the streets, allowing police to harass and arrest you with little justification. The Contagious Diseases Acts implemented in some garrison towns are a particularly cruel example. They effectively target women suspected of prostitution for forced internal examinations and detention in lock hospitals under the guise of protecting the health of servicemen. Men the carriers and clients face no such scrutiny, highlighting the era's deeply misogynistic double standards. You are criminalised for your existence while your clients remain respectable, their transgressions conveniently ignored. Beyond direct legal mechanisms, the prevailing societal attitudes and moral hypocrisy act as powerful invisible chains. The fallen woman narrative, so prevalent in Victorian discourse, stigmatises you irrevocably, ensuring that even if you could escape the brothel, you could never truly escape the judgment. This societal condemnation effectively closes off all avenues for rehabilitation or reintegration into respectable society. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Society pushes you into the shadows, then condemns you for dwelling there, ensuring you remain trapped in the very life it despises. You're not simply oppressed by Mrs. Harper. You're oppressed by an entire system, a collective societal will that dictates your fate. The educational disparity further exacerbates your plight. While some philanthropic efforts attempted to provide education for the poor, truly comprehensive schooling was a luxury largely inaccessible to girls from impoverished backgrounds. Without literacy or marketable skills, your employment options were severely limited from the outset. You watch as men, even those from working-class backgrounds, have more opportunities for advancement, for learning a trade, for improving their station. For you, the lack of education is another brick in the wall of your confinement, sealing off pathways to a life beyond the brothel. This intricate web of class, gender and economic forces creates a systemic dehumanization that shapes every moment of your existence, from the very air you breathe to the future you can barely imagine. Within the stark, often brutal world of the Victorian brothel, you discover a subtle tapestry of social dynamics, a hidden ecosystem that thrives beneath the iron rule of the madame and the judgmental gaze of society. It's a world where camaraderie, competition, and quiet acts of defiance intertwine, creating a complex, often fragile network of relationships among the women. You quickly learn that while you're all exploited, you're not entirely alone, and a form of shared understanding, a silent language of survival, binds you together. The solidarity among the girls, while often ephemeral, is a vital lifeline. You witness small, unexpected acts of kindness that cut through the pervasive bleakness. A shared cup of tea when one of you is ill, a piece of stale bread slipped discreetly into a hungry hand, a whispered warning about a particularly cruel customer, or a moment of genuine empathetic silence when tears finally overcome a hardened exterior. These aren't grand gestures, but tiny, powerful affirmations of shared humanity, acknowledging the invisible wounds you all carry. You learn that sometimes the only people who truly understand what you're enduring are the ones living through it right alongside you. However, this camaraderie exists in constant tension with the forces of competition and resentment. Mrs. Harper, the madame, often subtly exploits this pitting. The girls against each other for the most lucrative customers, for small privileges, or for a temporary reprieve from her wrath. A new young girl might be seen as a threat, diverting attention and income. An older, less attractive woman might feel her position precarious, leading to acts of backbiting or betrayal. You learn to navigate these treacherous waters, to read the unspoken rivalries, to protect yourself from both the madame's machinations and the desperate actions of your companions. It's a sad reality that even in shared suffering, human nature can sometimes still find ways to divide. The arrival of a new girl is always a moment of quiet observation. You see the fear in her eyes, the lingering vestiges of innocence, the desperate hope that she quickly loses. The older girls, hardened by experience, might offer a few brusque but practical pieces of advice: how to feign pleasure, how to endure, how to minimize physical harm, how to avoid Mrs. Harper's sharper moods. It's a grim initiation, a passing down of survival strategies learned through bitter experience. You remember your own arrival, the overwhelming confusion and terror, and a silent part of you might reach out to the newcomer, recognizing a reflection of your past self. Within this hidden world, there's also a subtle subculture of language and understanding. You learn the unspoken codes, the veiled references to certain clients, the euphemisms for various acts, the slang that separates your world from the respectable one outside. It's a way of communicating that both protects you from external judgment and solidifies your internal bonds. This shared language, incomprehensible to outsiders, creates a small pocket of belonging, a sense of collective identity forged in shared experience. You become fluent in a vernacular of the margins, a secret tongue understood only by those who dwell in the shadows. Beneath the surface of daily transactions, you also witness and sometimes participate in small acts of individual and collective defiance. These aren't overt rebellions, but quiet, almost imperceptible acts of reclaiming a sliver of agency. It might be a momentary refusal to engage with a particularly unpleasant client, a refusal quickly overturned by the madam, but a refusal nonetheless, a shared moment of mocking Mrs. Harper behind her back, or the simple act of sharing a treasured ribbon or a salvaged piece of fruit. These are not revolutions, but small tenacious assertions of self, tiny flickers of dignity in a world determined to extinguish it. These nuanced dynamics form a vital part of your daily existence, providing both solace and sorrow in equal measure, but always within the inescapable confines of your world. For many women like you, the sheer physical toll of life as a Victorian prostitute was devastating and often irreversible, leading to a precipitous decline in health and vitality. Your body, far from being your own, becomes a tool, a site of constant labour and abuse, leaving you prematurely aged and riddled with chronic ailments. The very demands of the profession ensured that your physical form bore the indelible marks of your existence, a grim testament to the life you were forced to lead. The relentless hours, often stretching through the night without reprieve, led to chronic exhaustion that sleep rarely seemed to alleviate. You constantly felt a profound weariness deep in your bones, a fatigue that permeated every muscle, every thought. This persistent exhaustion weakened your immune system, making you more susceptible to every passing illness, every sniffle turning into a cough, every cut into a festering sore. Your body simply couldn't recover, couldn't repair itself from the daily onslaught, leaving you in a perpetual state of depletion. Malnutrition, as discussed further, compounded these physical vulnerabilities. The monotonous, inadequate diet meant you lacked essential vitamins and nutrients, leading to a general state of weakness, anemia, and compromised immunity. Your hair might thin, your skin grow sallow, your teeth decay. You observed how your own once youthful features began to sag, how your posture stooped, how your walk became a shuffle of weary resignation. The energy that once fueled your spirit was slowly siphoned away, replaced by a constant gnawing hunger and a pervasive sense of physical depletion. Chronic pain became a universal companion. The physical demands of the profession, coupled with the frequent abuse, left you with constant aches in your back, your joints, your muscles. Bruises, sprains, and minor injuries were commonplace, often untreated, and left to fester, leading to more serious infections. You learned to ignore these pains, to push through them, to treat your body as a separate entity that simply had to perform regardless of its complaints. But the body has its limits, and yours was constantly being pushed beyond them, each day, adding another layer of damage, another ache to your ever-growing collection. The lack of proper hygiene and sanitation further exacerbated all these problems. Open sores, untreated cuts, and the pervasive presence of lice and fleas contributed to a constant state of skin irritation and infection. Without access to clean water, fresh clothing, and basic medical care, even minor ailments could quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions. You observed how a small cut on a girl's hand could become red and swollen, sometimes leading to a fever, an infection that could take her off her feet or worse. The environment itself was a hostile agent, constantly working against your body's ability to heal and maintain itself. The psychological and emotional distress you endured also took a severe physical toll. Chronic anxiety, fear, shame, and depression manifested in physical symptoms, digestive issues, heart palpitations, chronic headaches, and persistent insomnia. Your mind and body were inextricably linked in this suffering. The mental anguish would manifest physically, and the physical pain would deepen your emotional despair. It was a cruel feedback loop that ensured your suffering was comprehensive, touching every aspect of your being, accelerating the process of aging and decay. Each day chipped away not just at your spirit, but at the very substance of your physical being, leaving you a shadow of your former self, a body worn out long before its time. Beyond the visible physical scars, the psychological and emotional impact of being a Victorian prostitute proved to be an even more profound and insidious burden, slowly eroding your sense of self, your dignity, and your capacity for joy. This internal landscape, scarred by trauma and despair, often became a prison far more inescapable than any physical debt or brothel wall. You learned to wear masks, to build walls, to retreat deep within yourself, but the cost of that emotional detachment is immense. The constant dehumanization, being treated as merely an object, a vessel for another's pleasure, strips away your sense of personal worth. You're reduced to a transaction, your body a commodity, your emotions an inconvenient distraction. This relentless objectification fosters a profound sense of self-loathing and worthlessness, making it increasingly difficult to see yourself as a human being deserving of respect or love. You might find yourself avoiding mirrors, not wanting to see the reflection of a person you no longer recognize, a person you've been taught to despise. The pervasive shame and stigma associated with your profession create an immense emotional burden. You carry the weight of societal condemnation, the unspoken judgment of every respectable person you encounter. This internalizes, becoming a corrosive voice that whispers of your fallen status, your impurity. You learn to hide, to avoid public spaces, to recoil from any reminder of the life you lead. This shame isolates you, making genuine connection difficult even with those who share your plight. It's a constant gnawing pain that never truly goes away, a brand on your soul. Forced intimacy, the repeated violation of your personal boundaries and bodily autonomy, leads to deep-seated trauma. Each encounter, whether physically violent or merely emotionally deadening, chips away at your ability to feel, to trust, to experience genuine connection. You learn to dissociate, to mentally separate from your body, to detach your mind from your physical form as a coping mechanism. But this dissociation, while protecting you in the moment, also leaves you feeling hollow, detached, unable to truly connect with your own emotions or with others. It's a profound internal severing, leaving you a ghost in your own life. The constant fear of violence, fear of disease, fear of the police, fear of Mrs. Harper's wrath, fear of starvation, creates a state of chronic anxiety and hypervigilance. You are always on edge, always anticipating the next threat, always scanning your environment for danger. This constant state of heightened awareness is utterly exhausting, draining your mental and emotional reserves. It manifests in restless sleep, in nightmares, in a perpetual feeling of unease that never truly dissipates. Your nervous system is constantly activated, leaving you frayed and brittle. And then there is the profound despair, the crushing realization of your seemingly inescapable situation. Hope, a precious commodity, becomes scarce. The dreams you might have once harbored, however simple, slowly wither and die. This deep-seated hopelessness can lead to severe depression, a heavy cloak that smothers any flicker of joy or purpose. You might find yourself retreating into silence, losing interest in the small comforts that once provided solace, simply existing from one grueling day to the next. The emotional landscape of your life becomes barren, a wasteland of unfulfilled potential and forgotten dreams, leaving you to wonder if there will ever be any true peace. The very architecture and design of the Victorian brothel itself, particularly a second-rate establishment like Mrs. Harper's, contributed significantly to the dehumanization and containment of the women within. It wasn't simply a building. It was a carefully constructed mechanism of control designed for efficiency and exploitation rather than comfort or dignity. You might not have consciously analysed it, but you felt its oppressive presence in every groaning floorboard and every dimly lit corridor. From the outside, many brothels blended seamlessly into the urban landscape, often tucked away on narrow side streets or in unassuming terraced houses. Their exteriors might have appeared unremarkable, deliberately designed to avoid overt attention from the respectable world, yet offering just enough subtle cues to those in the know. You'd notice the subtly curtained windows, perhaps a gaslight burning a little too brightly, or the quiet, discreet entrance where clients would slip in unnoticed. This outward anonymity was part of the deception, allowing society to pretend such places didn't exist, even as they thrived in plain sight. Inside the layout was often a labyrinth of cramped functional spaces. The entrance would lead into a small, dimly lit receiving parlour, furnished with heavy, worn velvet furniture, where clients would wait and make their selections. This room, often smelling of stale cigars and cheap perfume, was the threshold between the respectable world and the hidden one, a place where choices were made with quiet, calculating glances. You, the women, would sometimes be paraded here, made to stand under the harsh gaslight. Your bodies scrutinised, your faces arranged into an agreeable mask waiting to be chosen. Beyond the parlour, narrow twisting staircases would lead to the upper floors where the private rooms were located. These stairs, often rickety and uncarpeted, were utilitarian, designed for quick, frequent passage rather than comfort. Each step you took echoed the hurried footsteps of countless women before you, carrying with it the silent weight of their experiences. The hallways upstairs would be dimly lit, often by a single flickering gas lamp, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to emphasize the secrecy and confinement. Every turn felt like another step deeper into a labyrinth from which escape seemed increasingly improbable. The individual private rooms, as you've already experienced, were uniformly small and sparsely furnished. A narrow bed, often a straw mattress, a small wash basin, and perhaps a single rickety chair or a tiny dressing table with a chipped mirror. These rooms were not designed for comfort or privacy, but for functionality and rapid turnover. The thin walls meant every sound carried, blurring the boundaries between private encounters and communal experience. You were constantly aware of the activity in the adjacent rooms, the sounds of voices, moans and creaks from neighbouring beds, a relentless soundtrack that underscored your shared reality, further eroding any sense of individual space or dignity. Even the windows of these rooms often featured heavy dark curtains or frosted panes, preventing any view of the outside world or any glimpse from within. This physical barrier to the outside world served to heighten the sense of isolation and confinement. You were disconnected from the rhythms of the city, from the changing seasons, from the very notion of a life beyond these walls. The architecture itself became a cage, a tangible manifestation of your entrapment, reinforcing the psychological isolation and the feeling that your world had shrunk to the dimensions of a single, dimly lit room and the confines of your own weary mind. The brothel was not just a place, it was a system designed to consume you whole. The economic underpinnings of your life were in essence a complex web of debt deductions and deliberate exploitation, meticulously designed to ensure you remain perpetually bound to Mrs. Harper and her establishment. This wasn't merely a business model. It was a sophisticated, if cruel, mechanism of control far more effective than any lock or chain. You quickly learn that your labour, your body, is not truly yours, but a tool whose profits are siphoned away long before they ever reach your hands. From the moment you arrive, you're immediately plunged into debt. Mrs. Harper might offer you a seemingly kind gesture. "You'll need a new dress, darling," or "your room and board will be taken care of." But these are not gifts. They're liabilities carefully recorded in her ledger, instantly creating an insurmountable financial obligation. The coarse fabric for your dresses, the meagre food you consume, the straw mattress you sleep on. Everything has a price inflated far beyond its actual value. In a grim sense, you are buying your own captivity 1 shilling at a time. Your earnings, the actual money exchanged for your services, are then subjected to a relentless series of deductions. A significant portion, often the lion's share, goes directly to Mrs. Harper as her cut. Then come the charges for your lodging, kiss meals, linens, and even gaslight and heating. Expenses you have no control over and no ability to negotiate. These deductions are so extensive that by the time the final tally is made, the few shillings that remain are often barely enough to cover your most basic personal needs, let alone offer any hope of saving. You're working constantly, yet perpetually pour a treadmill of labour with no end in sight. Then there are the fines, Mrs. Harper's arbitrary but highly effective tool for maintaining discipline and further deepening your debt. A perceived act of insolence, a tear in a dress, a missed customer, a refusal to see a client, even a momentary lapse in your practiced cheerfulness, all can result in a fine. These are not merely penalties, they're additional financial burdens meticulously added to your growing ledger, ensuring that any small gains you might have made are immediately negated. You live in constant fear of incurring a fine, knowing that each one pushes you further away from any possibility of freedom, making you work even harder for even less. The system is engineered to prevent accumulation. Any small sum you manage to hold on to any thought of saving for a life outside is quickly absorbed by an unexpected fee or another urgent expense. Perhaps a doctor's visit ostensibly for your health, but really a means to keep you working, comes with a hefty charge, or a new mandatory dress is deemed necessary. The goal is to keep you perpetually in arrears, owing Mrs. Harper more than you could ever realistically earn, thus eliminating any incentive or means to escape. You are literally working to pay off a debt that is designed to be infinite. This economic subjugation means you have no real agency over your own future. You cannot save for a different life, you cannot pay for a passage somewhere else, and you cannot afford to simply walk away. Your economic chains are stronger than any physical ones, invisible but unbreakable. You are a chattel, your labour and your body mortgaged indefinitely to the madam. This deep-seated economic exploitation is a defining characteristic of your existence, a constant reminder that in Victorian London even your very suffering is profitable for someone else, ensuring that the dark machinery of your life continues to turn without pause. Amidst the pervasive bleakness and the relentless grind of daily life, moments of quiet resilience and unexpected camaraderie occasionally pierce through the gloom, offering small, fleeting glimpses of human strength and connection. These are not grand acts of rebellion, but subtle assertions of humanity, tiny sparks in the vast darkness that remind you, and your companions, that you're not entirely broken, not entirely lost. You witness, and sometimes participate in small acts of mutual support among the girls, a silent understanding born of shared suffering. It might be a whispered word of encouragement after a particularly brutal customer, a knowing glance that says, "I understand, I've been there." Or it could be a shared morsel of food, a piece of salvaged fruit, or a slightly cleaner piece of cloth for a wound. These are gestures of care that cut through the competition and the madam's attempts to divide, creating a fragile but vital network of empathy. You learn to rely on these small moments, to cherish them as rare gems in an otherwise barren landscape, understanding that in this world sisterhood is a quiet, desperate act of survival, Humour, often dark and tinged with cynicism, also becomes a powerful coping mechanism. You hear the wry jokes whispered behind Mrs. Harper's back, the knowing sarcasm about a pompous client, or the bleak gallows humour about your own precarious existence. This isn't laughter born of joy, but a release valve for despair, a way to reclaim a tiny sliver of control by mocking the very forces that oppress you. It's a shared language of resilience, a way of saying, we see the absurdity even if we can't change it. These moments of shared bitter humour are like brief, unexpected bursts of light, allowing you to breathe if only for a moment. The act of personal defiance, though small, are equally significant. It might be the stubborn refusal to wear a certain ridiculous ribbon Mrs. Harper demands, or the quiet act of treasuring a tiny chipped porcelain figurine, a reminder of a life before this one. Perhaps you secretly hoard a few pennies hidden deep in a shoe, a defiant gesture against the endless deductions, a symbol of a dream you refuse to let die however faint. These are not open challenges to authority, which would be met with swift and brutal punishment, but private acts of rebellion reaffirming your individual identity in a world that strives to erase it. These small resistances are crucial for maintaining a sense of self, a belief that you are still you despite everything. Storytelling too becomes a form of shared therapy and cultural transmission. You listen to the older girls recount tales of their past lives, of families they once knew, of towns they came from, of hopes that were shattered. You share your own abbreviated stories carefully edited to omit the most painful parts. These narratives passed around in hushed tones during the quiet hours are a way of preserving memory, of affirming identity, of creating a collective history that transcends the immediate grim reality. They are also a way of teaching, of passing on the unwritten rules of survival, the lessons learned from bitter experience, preparing the younger ones for the harsh realities that lie ahead. These subtle dynamics of resilience, camaraderie and defiance are not enough to overthrow the system, nor do they erase the deep wounds inflicted by your life. But they are crucial for enduring it. They provide the emotional and psychological sustenance needed to face another day, another client, another fine. They are the quiet, beating heart of a hidden world, reminding you that even in the darkest corners of Victorian London, human spirit, however bruised and battered, can still find ways to assert itself, to seek connection, and to persist against overwhelming odds. But this persistence comes at an immense personal cost, etching itself into your very soul. The ultimate costs of being a Victorian prostitute, both physical and psychological, are immense, enduring and often irreversible, extending far beyond the immediate hardships of daily life. This is not simply a matter of temporary suffering. It is a profound and fundamental alteration of your very being, leaving an indelible mark on your body, your mind, and your future. You're not just living a hard life. You're being slowly consumed by it, piece by agonizing piece. Physically, your body bears the brunt of the relentless exploitation and unsanitary conditions. As we've discussed, chronic illnesses from respiratory ailments to gastrointestinal issues are your constant companions. Sexually transmitted infections, particularly syphilis, ravage your internal organs and ultimately your mind, leading to slow agonizing decay and eventual madness. Your body, prematurely aged, is a roadmap of pain scars and disfigurement, a grim testament to the cumulative trauma it has endured. You might look in the mirror and see not a young woman but a ghost, her youth, stolen her vitality, extinguished her strength, utterly depleted. Psychologically, the impact is equally devastating. The constant dehumanization, the forced intimacy, the pervasive shame and the relentless fear combine to create a landscape of deep-seated trauma. You suffer from chronic anxiety, depression, and often a profound sense of dissociation, a protective mechanism that leaves you feeling detached from your own body and emotions. The ability to trust, to form genuine connections, or to experience unburdened joy slowly atrophies. Your mind is a battlefield scarred by nightmares and haunted by memories you desperately try to suppress, but which always linger at the edges of your consciousness. The social costs are immense and largely insurmountable. Once branded a fallen woman, reintegration into respectable society is a near impossibility. The stigma clings to you, closing off all avenues for legitimate employment, for marriage, or for any form of conventional domesticity. You are an outcast relegated to the margins perpetually defined by your past. This social death reinforces your isolation, deepening your despair, and cementing your entrapment. Even if you were to escape the brothel, the invisible chains of societal judgment would follow you, ensuring that true freedom remains an elusive dream. For those who manage to survive the initial years, the long-term prospects are bleak. Many succumb to disease, to alcohol or opium dependency, or simply to the cumulative weariness of their existence. Some end up in workhouses, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed, living out their final days in the grim charity of the state. Others might become street vendors selling flowers or trinkets, their faces etched with the telltale signs of their past forever marked. The vast majority do not live to a ripe old age. Your life expectancy is drastically reduced, a bitter testament to the punishing nature of your profession. The erasure of your personal history and identity is another profound cost. The new names, the forced anonymity, the deliberate effacement of your past self all contribute to a profound loss of identity. You become Mary or Lily or Daisy, a generic type, rather than an individual with unique story, hopes and dreams. Your humanity is systematically stripped away, leaving you with a fragmented sense of self, a person whose true identity has been sacrificed on the altar of survival. This loss of self, this profound sense of being erased, marks the most tragic and enduring consequence of all. Amidst the deeply entrenched system of exploitation, there existed, however, minimally various attempts at rescue and rehabilitation for fallen women in Victorian society. These efforts, often driven by evangelical fervour and philanthropic zeal, sought to offer an alternative path, a way out of the brothel and back towards what was deemed respectable womanhood. However, their approaches were frequently fraught with their own set of challenges, moral judgments, and often an inherent misunderstanding of the complex realities that trapped women in prostitution. You might have heard whispers of these institutions: Magdalene asylums, rescue homes, or reformatories. These establishments, typically run by religious organisations or benevolent societies, aim to provide shelter, food, and moral instruction. Their underlying philosophy, however, often stemmed from the belief that women in prostitution were moral transgressors who needed to be reformed and rehabilitated through strict discipline, religious teaching, and hard labour, rather than victims of systemic injustice. You'd hear stories of girls who tried and sometimes failed to adapt to their rigid rules. Admission to these homes often came with stringent conditions. You would be expected to publicly repent for your sins, sever all ties with your past life, and commit to a regime of moral instruction and domestic training. The emphasis was heavily on restoring virtue and teaching skills suitable for domestic service: sewing, cleaning, cooking. While seemingly offering a way out, these institutions often replaced one form of servitude with another, albeit more respectable one, often with even stricter rules and less personal freedom than you might have experienced in some brothels. The success rates of these rescue efforts were perhaps predictably mixed at best. Many women, scarred by their experiences and perhaps weary of yet another form of institutional control, found it difficult to adapt to the highly restrictive, often infantilizing environments of these homes. The stigma of their past often followed them, making it challenging to secure genuine employment even after their reformation. Some found the domestic service placements offered by the homes to be just as exploitative and lonely as their previous lives, leading them to quickly abscond or tragically return to the streets out of desperation. Moreover, the psychological toll of past trauma was rarely addressed. These institutions focused almost entirely on moral and practical reformation, neglecting the deep emotional wounds, the chronic anxiety, and the sense of worthlessness that many women carried. You couldn't simply pray away trauma or sew away despair. Without genuine therapeutic support, many women struggled to cope with their emotional scars unhealed, making lasting rehabilitation a formidable challenge. The well-meaning intentions often lacked a fundamental understanding of human psychology. While these homes represented a glimmer of hope for some, they also highlighted the inherent contradictions of Victorian society. They were a societal attempt to cleanse itself of a problem it had largely created without fundamentally addressing the root causes of poverty, gender inequality, and male demand that drove women into prostitution in the first place. You recognise the irony. Society wanted to save you, but it wasn't willing to change the conditions that put you in danger. Thus, while offering a different kind of confinement, these rescue efforts rarely offered true liberation, and the vast majority of women in your position never even encountered such an opportunity, remaining trapped within the grim realities of their daily existence. The path to finding any kind of true freedom or escape from the life of a Victorian prostitute was often a perilous and elusive one, fraught with immense obstacles that went far beyond simply walking out the door of a brothel. For most women, the chances of completely breaking free from the economic, social and psychological chains that bound them were exceedingly slim, a testament to the unforgiving nature of their circumstances. One of the most immediate and formidable barriers was, as you know all too well, debt. The meticulously maintained ledgers of Mrs. Harper ensured that you were perpetually in arrears, owing more than you could ever earn. To leave meant defaulting on this debt, which could lead to severe consequences, from physical violence at the hands of the madam's enforcers to being handed over to the police under various pretexts. You simply couldn't afford to leave. The economic chains were too strong, too binding. Then there was the relentless stigma. Even if you managed to repay your debt or simply flee your past, would follow you like a haunting shadow. The label of a fallen woman was indelible, virtually guaranteeing that no respectable employer would hire you, no landlady would rent you a room in a decent neighbourhood, and no virtuous man would consider marrying you. Society, with its unforgiving moral codes, ensured that you remained an outcast, effectively closing off all avenues for a new, clean life. This social death was a prison without walls, just as potent as any physical confinement. A lack of marketable skills further complicated any attempt at escape. Most women entered prostitution with little to no formal education or training. The skills acquired in a brothel, while essential for survival within that world, were entirely useless, indeed detrimental, in the respectable labour market. Without the ability to read, write, or perform a specific trade, your options for legitimate employment were severely limited, pushing you back into the cycle of poverty, and often back to the streets. It was a cruel paradox. The life you were forced into stripped you of the very tools you needed to escape it. Beyond these practical barriers, the psychological toll of your experiences created deep emotional wounds that made starting fresh incredibly difficult. Chronic trauma, a profound sense of worthlessness, and the inability to trust made it challenging to navigate the complexities of a normal life. You might find yourself struggling with social interactions, constantly feeling out of place, or grappling with deep-seated depression and anxiety. Even if physically free, your mind could remain a prisoner of its past, making true emotional liberation a distant dream. For a few, however, escape did happen. Perhaps an older, less scrupulous client with a strange sense of misplaced pity might offer a small sum of money enough for a ticket on a ship to another country, a chance at an anonymous fresh start where your past was unknown. Or a fiercely independent girl, driven by an indomitable will, might manage to squirrel away tiny amounts of money over years, enduring unimaginable hardships for the faint hope of a future. But these were rare, almost mythical occurrences, exceptional stories against a backdrop of countless women who remained trapped, their lives consumed by the unforgiving machinery of Victorian London. The perception and treatment of women in prostitution by the broader Victorian medical establishment reveal yet another layer of societal hypocrisy and dehumanisation. Rather than being seen as patients deserving of care, you were often viewed as vectors of disease, moral deviance, and a threat to the health of the respectable male population. This attitude profoundly shaped the limited and often brutal medical interventions you might have received. You would rarely, if ever, encounter a doctor who treated you with genuine compassion or respect. For them, you were not an individual with pain or a history. You were a case, a source of infection, or a fallen woman, whose suffering was in their eyes likely self-inflicted or deserved. This moralistic judgment often seeped into their professional conduct, leading to dismissive examinations, curt advice, and a general lack of empathy. You learned to expect this, to steel yourself against their cold stares and their patronising tones, knowing that any interaction with the medical world would be yet another indignity to endure. The treatment for sexually transmitted infections, particularly syphilis, was a terrifying ordeal. As mentioned, mercury was the primary, often only remedy. You might endure applications of mercury ointment, or even ingest mercury compounds, leading to agonising side effects. Severe salivation, swollen gums, rotting, teeth, loss of hair, tremors, and profound internal damage. This wasn't healing. It was often a slow, agonising poisoning, a cure that could be as debilitating, if not more so, than the disease itself. You would see women emerge from these treatments looking gaunt, scarred, and often more unwell than when they entered their bodies irrevocably damaged. The infamous Contagious Diseases Act CDAs, enacted in various garrison towns, represent the pinnacle of this medicalised control and moralistic judgment. Under these acts, any woman suspected of being a prostitute could be forcibly subjected to internal examinations by male doctors. If found to have a venereal disease, you could be detained in a lock hospital for months, subjected to further invasive treatments, all without your consent or any due process. These examinations were often described as humiliating and traumatizing, a profound violation of bodily autonomy, designed to cleanse women for the sake of soldiers' health, while the men who infected them faced no such scrutiny or forced detention. For severe ailments not related to venereal disease, your options were equally grim. Charity hospitals were overcrowded and understaffed, their wards filled with the sick and dying from the city's poorest districts. You might be admitted, but you would likely receive rudimentary care, often relegated to the least desirable beds, your social status preceding you. Workhouse infirmaries offered another, even more desperate option. Grim, dehumanising places where basic necessities were barely met and dignity was stripped away. The very thought of ending up in such a place was a constant, terrifying fear. This medical system, rather than acting as a source of relief, often became another instrument of your oppression. It pathologized your existence, reduced you to a biological threat, and subjected your body to invasive and dangerous treatments, all while cloaked in the authority of scientific respectability. You were not seen as someone in need of care, but as a problem to be managed, a diseased body to be contained, reinforcing the cruel paradox that your suffering was both invisible and yet relentlessly scrutinized, ultimately serving the interests of a society that wished to both exploit and condemn you. The concept of a future, as most people understand it, a trajectory of growth, progression, and potential for improvement, was largely an illusion for women in your position in Victorian London. Your life was defined by the present, by the daily struggle for survival, with the future stretching out not as a promise, but as a bleak, inevitable decline. The pathways to a normal life, to marriage, motherhood, or respected employment were systematically closed off, leaving you with a narrow, often tragic set of prospects. One of the most immediate and profound impacts on your future was the drastically reduced life expectancy. Your life was not simply hard, it was brutally short. Chronic illness, untreated infections, alcohol and opium abuse, violence from clients or pimps, and the sheer cumulative exhaustion of your existence all contributed to a dramatically shortened lifespan compared to respectable women of the era. You would often see women barely in their 30s looking decades older, their bodies ravaged, their spirits extinguished, slowly fading away. The future was not a distant horizon. It was a rapidly approaching wall, a certainty of an early demise. For those who managed to survive the most acute dangers, the long-term prospects were rarely appealing. Many would gradually lose their youthful looks, their market value diminishing with each passing year. As your beauty faded, so too did your ability to attract clients, leaving you increasingly vulnerable to deeper poverty. You might find yourself pushed to the absolute margins of the profession, working in the cheapest, most dangerous parts of the city, or forced into even more desperate acts to survive. The aging process was not a graceful transition. It was a cruel descent into further destitution and loneliness. The workhouse often represented the grim final destination for many. These institutions designed to house the destitute offered a meagre existence in exchange for hard, monotonous labour, but at the complete cost of your dignity and freedom. For women who were too old, too ill, or too broken to continue working, the workhouse was the only safety net available. You'd seen women there, their faces hollow, their eyes empty, a chilling premonition of your own potential future, a stark reminder of where a life like yours ultimately led. It was a place of last resort, a living death where all hope had long since evaporated. A very small fraction of women might find a different path, though often still shadowed by their past. Some might become madames themselves, rising through the ranks, to exploit others as they once were exploited, perpetuating the cycle of abuse. Others might find a benefactor, a man who, out of a peculiar sense of attachment or pity, would set them up in a small discreet business, or provide a modest allowance, allowing them to live out their remaining years in quiet anonymity. But these were rare exceptions, almost mythical tales passed around the brothel, more fantasy than reality for most. Ultimately, the future for a Victorian prostitute was rarely one of redemption or escape into a happy ending. It was a relentless march towards an inevitable decline marked by physical decay, deeper social isolation, and an almost certain early death. Your existence was a perpetual present, a cycle of suffering that offered no real tomorrow beyond more of the same or worse. This understanding, this grim acceptance of your limited future, was a heavy burden to bear, a quiet despair that settled deep in your bones, underscoring the relentless nature of this shadowed existence. The concept of private property and its impact on your life, while seemingly an abstract economic principle, was acutely felt in your daily existence within Victorian London. For you, the lack of ownership, the complete absence of personal assets, was a fundamental pillar of your entrapment, an invisible cage that locked you into perpetual dependence and vulnerability. Your body, your labour, your very future, none of it was truly yours. You're acutely aware that you own nothing of true value. Your meagre clothes are provided or at least paid for through debt by Mrs. Harper. Your bed, your room, the very roof over your head, all belong to her. Even the few personal trinkets you might possess, a chipped hairbrush or a treasured ribbon, hold sentimental value but no economic worth. This complete absence of private property means you have no collateral, no means to secure a loan, no assets to sell in order to fund an escape. You are in essence property yourself, or at least your services are. This lack of ownership is a direct consequence of your extreme poverty and social status. In a society increasingly defined by material wealth and possessions, you stand at the very bottom, completely dispossessed. While the wealthy accumulate vast estates, factories, and fortunes, you possess nothing but the clothes on your back and the body you use to survive. This stark contrast highlights the profound economic chasm that separates you from the respectable world, a chasm that property ownership actively reinforces. You exist outside the realm of legitimate economic participation defined by what you don't have. The legal implications of this were also profound. Without property, you had little standing in the eyes of the law. You couldn't enter into contracts, couldn't secure legal representation for disputes with a madam, even if you dared, and had little recourse if your few meagre possessions were stolen or confiscated. The law designed to protect the property rights of the wealthy offered you no such protections. Instead, as we've seen, it often functioned as another tool to control and criminalize you, further emphasizing your status as a person without rights or tangible assets. This economic powerlessness extends to your physical self. Your body, the sole means of your income, is not truly yours to control. It is rented, bought and sold by others, its value determined by market forces, and the whims of clients, its use dictated by the madame. You cannot refuse a customer without incurring severe penalties, cannot decide your own hours, and cannot demand better conditions. The concept of bodily autonomy, of owning your own physical form, is a luxury utterly denied to you. Your body becomes a form of capital, but capital that you do not own, and from which you derive only the barest subsistence. Ultimately, the lack of private property solidifies your entrapment, making true independence a near impossible dream. To own property, to have assets, is to possess a degree of autonomy and power in Victorian society. To have none is to be utterly beholden to others, to be constantly vulnerable to exploitation, and to have no means of breaking free. This is not merely a financial condition. It is a fundamental state of being, defining your relationship to the world, to yourself, and to your bleak, uncertain future. Your lack of ownership is the very foundation of your powerlessness. The architectural and urban design of Victorian London itself played a crucial, though often subtle, role in shaping and segregating the lives of women in your profession. The city was not a uniform entity. It was a patchwork of distinct zones, each with its own character rules and unspoken boundaries. For you, these urban divisions were not just geographical markers, but invisible lines that dictated your movements, your visibility, and ultimately your place in society. You lived and worked in districts often characterized by their density, their anonymity, and their proximity to areas of both poverty and commercial activity. Places like Whitechapel, the East End, or parts of Westminster's darker corners became your world. These were areas where the narrow, winding streets offered shadows for discretion, where the crowded tenements provided cover, and where the transient nature of the population allowed for a degree of anonymity. You learned to navigate these labyrinths instinctively, recognizing the safe pathways and the dangerous alleys, the gaslights that offered faint illumination, and the darker stretches where trouble often lurked. The brothels themselves were often integrated into the urban fabric in specific ways. While some were purpose-built, many were simply ordinary houses repurposed and slightly modified to serve their function. They would be nestled among legitimate businesses and working class, housing their discreet exteriors, masking the illicit activities within. This blending allowed for a degree of respectability in their appearance, making them less obvious to moral crusaders, but still identifiable to their clientele. You'd observe how the architecture itself aided in the necessary deception, the facade of normalcy over the reality of exploitation. However, your presence was not confined solely to these discrete establishments. You also worked the streets, particularly in key thoroughfares and entertainment districts where potential clients were abundant. Places like the Haymarket, a notorious cruising ground, became a stage for your daily survival. Here, the sheer volume of people, the bustle of carriages, the bright lights of theatres and music halls provided a different kind of anonymity, a sense of being lost in the crowd. Yet you also experienced the constant threat of police harassment, the open stares of judgment, and the jostling of drunken men, making these public spaces simultaneously vital for income and profoundly dangerous. This segregation extended to public services and facilities. While respectable women might frequent public parks, libraries, or tea rooms, you were largely excluded from these spaces either by explicit prohibition or by the crushing weight of social stigma. You move through the city in shadows your leisure moments, if any confined to the relative safety of your own district or a discreet, less respectable public house. The city in its design and its social mores effectively cordoned off vast swathes of itself from your presence, reinforcing your status as an outcast, someone who did not belong in the public eye. This urban segregation, both physical and social, ultimately contributed to your sense of isolation and entrapment. It created a world within a world, a hidden society operating just beneath the surface of Victorian propriety. You were confined to specific geographical and social territories, your movements restricted, your visibility carefully managed. The city itself, in its vastness and its divisions, became an accomplice in your exploitation, a labyrinth that both offered the means of your survival and actively worked to contain and define your existence, making true escape not just a social challenge but a physical battle against the very layout of London itself. The enduring legacy of the Victorian prostitute in popular culture is a complex and often distorted one, frequently romanticising or sensationalising a life that was in reality profoundly grim and devoid of glamour. You've likely seen the images: the mysterious woman in a gaslit alley, the tragic beauty, the rebellious spirit, all narratives that soften the harsh edges of historical truth. These depictions, while perhaps making for compelling fiction, inadvertently erase the daily indignities, the systemic exploitation, and the immense suffering that characterise your actual existence. One common trope is the hooker with a heart of gold, a character who, despite her profession, retains an inner purity and often plays a pivotal role in helping others. While individual acts of kindness certainly occurred among women in your position, this narrative often serves to make the character palatable to a moralizing audience, glossing over the brutalizing effects of the life itself. It projects a romantic ideal onto a reality of trauma and despair, minimizing the profound psychological toll that such a life inflicted. You who lived it know that preserving an untarnished heart of gold would be a near impossible feat in such an environment. Then there is the image of the tragic beauty, a woman whose descent into prostitution is framed as a fall from grace, a waste of exquisite looks and potential. These stories focus on the aesthetics of suffering, portraying a visually appealing anguish that invites pity rather than a confrontational understanding of systemic injustice. You might be depicted as frail, ethereal, a victim of circumstance, but rarely as resilient, hardened, or indeed angry about these societal forces that trapped you. This portrayal often prioritizes the male gaze, focusing on your outward appearance and perceived vulnerability rather than your inner strength or complex personhood. The rebellious temptress is another popular yet equally problematic representation. This narrative casts you as a woman who consciously chooses a life of sin, defying societal norms and embracing a dangerous freedom. While there might have been a rebellious spirit in some, the reality, as you know, was often one of utter lack of choice, a surrender to the inevitable. The freedom offered by prostitution was a cruel illusion exchanged for a different, often more severe form of bondage. This romanticization of rebellion overshadows the very real economic and social pressures that forced women into the profession, turning necessity into a supposed choice. These popular narratives, while captivating, ultimately contribute to the erasure of historical accuracy and the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes. They distort the lived experiences of countless women, replacing their complex, often horrific realities with convenient fictions. The subtle, quiet acts of resilience, the pervasive fear, the constant pain, the deep-seated shame, and the relentless dehumanization, these are the details that are often omitted, deemed too unpleasant or too undramatic for a mass audience. The true legacy, however, is not found in these romanticized tales. It lies in the untold stories of women like Mary, like Sarah, like Jenny, women whose names are largely forgotten, whose lives were consumed by the unforgiving machinery of Victorian London. Their legacy is a stark reminder of the brutal consequences of systemic poverty, profound gender inequality, and the moral hypocrisy of a society that exploited and condemned them in equal measure. It is a legacy that compels us to look beyond the alluring fog of fiction and acknowledge the profound suffering, the quiet strength, and the enduring human spirit that somehow persisted in the darkest corners of a rapidly changing world. And with that thought, we gently draw the curtain on tonight's journey. As the last echoes of Victorian London fade into the quiet hum of your own present, allow your mind to gently disengage from the shadows and struggles we've explored tonight. The sounds of creaking floorboards and distant foghorns can now transform into the comforting creaks of your own home, the gentle whisper of the night outside your window. Feel the softness of your own bed, the warmth of your covers, a stark, comforting contrast to the cold, damp straw mattresses of another time. Breathe deeply, letting go of the grim realities and the weight of their world, allowing the peace of your present moment to fill you. Remember, these journeys through history are not meant to disturb, but to offer a quiet contemplation, a deeper appreciation for the comforts we often take for granted. Let your thoughts drift light as a feather away from the past and towards the peaceful landscapes of sleep. The heavy air of that bygone era has lifted, replaced by the calm, clean air of your own room. Rest now, allow the stories to settle, and let tranquil dreams guide you through the night.